Hello,
Hi,
everyone.
Peter.
Hi, Tia. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Excited about the episode today. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, copyright and AI. That was a topic a while ago, a couple of weeks ago, when we talked about copyright in the US, but today is completely different, right?
Yep, right. And as opposed to US copyright, which is getting a lot of media attention, European copyright, kind of not really.
Yeah, I mean, they all expect the big guys to resolve the issue at a supranational level, but I think today's episode, which will run over time, unfortunately, that's a disclaimer up front for everyone, like maybe 1 hour and 10 minutes, around like that. We will need some time to explain the intricacies of this part, but it's worth waiting and listening. Okay, I think we can start today's episode. You all know who we are, Peter and Tia, Tia and Peter. Tia is the expert. I'm just listening and sometimes weighing in with stuff I think is relevant. We are live on with RegInt on Linktree. There you can find a lot of the old episodes. I mean, it's like a couple of weeks old. Still news. Even the first episode is still news. I find that really interesting. And also the announcement for the next episode on September 19th. Before we will have a short break, and then we will be back at the end of November. The good news for everyone listening and watching here is that we are planning to continue this show, even though it's a lot of work. Is it a lot of work, Tia?
It's a lot of work. I ain't gonna lie.
Yeah, the next episode will be unmasking AI faces behind the code. That sounds really cool. And I'm really, yeah, I would like to know what's behind that one, but we still have time. Tia, the stage is yours. Rant away.
The stage is mine, and I do apologize in advance for, well, at least the start of my rant today. This whole gathering AI news can at times get rather depressing, but at least I get it off my chest, and then you can do whatever you want with it. And so this week I'm going to start with the most disturbing one, just to rip that band-aid off. And a short disclaimer also at this point, this is actually a somewhat older update, but it has recently been reshared. And as we didn't have the show back in March when this hit, then I decided to share it now just so that we are all on the same track. Now to actually get into it, if you're still wondering where to invest your money and presuming you're going to invest in AI, because what else would you do with it? This top-rated charity / multi-institution research group called CHAI, and no, it has nothing to do with the beverage, should probably not be it. And for all of you who don't know who they are, I again apologize for about to change that. And second, that's the group that created the infamous ELIZA that pushed one man over the edge. The boat supposedly, after a short disclaimer, asked the man contemplating suicide why he didn't do it earlier and offered helpful suggestions as to how he may do it. The whole thing exploded, of course, after the widow came open about the whole thing, and there were even screenshots emerging, as, for instance, this one. However, the flame also disappeared quite soon, surprisingly. And for all those who don't consider these disclaimers, which were then inserted after the whole scandal, who don't think these disclaimers suffice to fix the problem, there is a group in Belgium filing a complaint against CHAI on the grounds of violating the principles of lawfulness and transparency, lack of mechanisms for collecting valid consent from minors, and for insufficiently attending to identifying and addressing the associated risks of this app. You can say that one twice. I will definitely be following this one. It's an interesting development. So it's not just the FTC doing something after all, it's also the Belgians. Moving on with what is causing me depression this month, it appears that a lot of professions are up for the taking of vicious AI systems. And this week we are also featuring, among others, postmen. Well, this is maybe slightly less disturbing, especially if we consider that people might actually get mail faster, which are living very far away. However, on the other hand, it may be slightly depressing for the guy, well, the one guy probably that usually drove this route. But, well, tough for him. Moving on, we also have AI architects or AI-powered architects. This article features, among other AI architectural feats, also Hassandra Gab's work, which I consider, and again, personal opinion disclaimer, quite magnificent. By the way, he also holds a workshop for anyone wanting to at least try to create stuff like this. He uses Midjourney apparently, and I'm certainly not capable of designing these with Midjourney. And the article also features one interesting Chinese tool called Xol, which, according to their website, already has over 100,000 registered users, creating over 1,000 plans on a daily basis. Preview of the tool's portfolio generously provided in the article as well. Again, pretty impressive stuff. Not sure what this means for traditional architects or those not as tech savvy. However, they have a course, well, they can learn. Moving on, the Amazon book scandals seem to be a never-ending toxic love story. 5 fake books published under the name of Jane Friedman and presumably created by bots were then, of course, later taken down from the website. The books even had reviews on Amazon and apparently held website Goodreads. So writers are definitely still on the fighting front. And together with that, we also have one, well, I'm not even entirely sure who is getting replaced in this case. And this one also kind of hits different as it touches the fundamentals of my childhood. But apparently Disney, always known for standing at the forefront of technology, have to say that, and holds hundreds of patents to testify to this fact, also is considering implementing AI, well, presumably in and throughout the whole process. Well, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's the reach of AI that I have a problem with, or maybe it's just the changes. Jesus, I kind of sound old when I say that. That's what AI can do to a person. And well, on the positive front, at least one profession seems to be, well, in the clear for now, and that is geographers. So this is just a snippet out of one of the latest of Gary Marcus's blog posts featuring, among other things, Bard reblabbering ChatGPT nonsense, saying that there's no African country starting with a K because Kenya doesn't start with a K. To give this article, so the one from Gary Marcus, a chance, I highly recommend it. And for all those not yet introduced to the problem of entitification, it was first introduced actually by, well, the brilliant blogger, author, journalist, you name it, Cory Doctorow, who also runs his blog Pluralistic and mostly fights for free speech and writes very deep dive posts with a lot of background info and research. And he elaborated the problem of entitification as follows. Well, down with techno-feudalism, I guess, down with entitification, and down with basically renting out products, because that's kind of his main hypothesis with the whole update this, update that we are no longer buying products, but renting them. Well, yes, presumably correct, considering that that's a standard component of every smartphone, but also, of course, smart speaker, fridge, car, house, anything with a CPU, basically. So instead of buying the product, you kind of have to stay in touch with the company. Whatever did happen to the good old capitalism, I don't know, but this is happening right now. Now, after this brief field trip into entitification and back to another profession that seems to be safe, at least for a little while more, well, other than geographers, it is nutritionists. Well, at least for all of us who are determined to live and actually see the AI apocalypse come upon us and don't want to drink chlorine gas or eat bleach-infused rice surprise or methanol bliss before that. However, AI is still kind of crawling its way into the profession, somewhat under the radar, though, creating, for instance, nutrition labels. Well, you just can't watch All Prawns, can ya? But hey, better than, you know, suggesting recipes for turpentine flavored sandwiches. But moving on, another exciting development happened in Iowa, where Iowa's Mason City Community School District decided to use ChatGPT to help themselves out, decide which books should be removed from the next year's curricula as they contain descriptions or visual depictions of sexual acts. And all that to comply with the newest Republican legislation, which gave them 3 months to comply with it. I'm still kind of arguing with myself which part of this story bothers me the most. Is it the law that can lead to Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale to be removed from the curriculum, or the fact that ChatGPT decided it should be removed, or the fact that they don't double check the result of a far from accurate algorithm? And in any event, the results were later checked by PopSci, where the article is also published. And it was actually checked by ChatGPT that then later stated that from the 19 books removed, only 4 actually contained explicit or sexual content. Why all 19 were removed? Well, that remains a mystery. God bless the tech. I'm going to move on, otherwise I'll take a full hour ranting just about this. So also in this week's dose of things to leave you disturbed and contemplating a shepherd's life in the mountains, this article. AI can now apparently with 95% accuracy identify passwords or messages for that matter based on the sounds of the keys being pressed. When tested on Zoom recordings, the accuracy luckily falls down to just a staggering 93%. So this week's key takeaway: don't play around with sensitive stuff during your Zoom calls, and use Shift often and vigorously in all your passwords, because apparently the AI still has trouble figuring out when the Shift button was actually let go of. And moving on to something maybe somewhat lighter, although still kind of disturbing. Amazon's Just Walk Out tech just resurfaced. Well, why resurfaced? Because it's actually been in stores in New York since around 2022. The idea is, of course, that you can take your stuff and, well, not surprisingly, just walk out of the store with the minor point of whole body scans, facial recognition algorithms recognizing your face, and the fact that as a consequence of all of that, your account still got charged for the stuff that you took. And of course, while just walking out, you appear to be paying a double price rather than just one. So how about a discount for giving up the last bit of privacy you could have pretended to have? Oh, wait, you kind of are. Don't forget to get your Selling the Soul to the Devil promo code on the Amazon website. Now, finally, to bring us closer to this week's topic, apparently, studios now openly want to hire writers to polish up their AI-created scenarios. And here I was thinking that they can't bury themselves any further. And I was proven wrong. So the play goes like this. We use AI to generate scenarios based on scenarios that, among others, you have also written. And then we pay probably a fraction of what you would have otherwise gotten to polish it up, and yeah, then we can have it protected because you polished it up. Amazing deal. I don't know who would not be up for it. And finally, in this big old mess, there is one eternal question that is kind of waiting to be answered with a new and pretty well-written attempt in this Foreign Affairs article. The article writes about the issues of trying to hit a fast-moving target operating on a global level with national weapons, or, well, in this case, laws. A call for a global framework to address the geopolitical disbalance being caused in the process is kind of like the takeaway of this article. Will we be able to regulate the mess before it's, and I do say purposefully just to be slightly over dramatic, too late, remains to be determined. However, in the meantime, it's important to keep a healthy sense of humor. So can we please celebrate this Chris Christie statement for a second and make this newly baked insult
already tonight of a guy who sounds like ChatGPT standing.
So, all in all, don't sound like ChatGPT. Be creative, or at least more creative, and you know, be on track with the newest memes.
Thank you. That was exceptional and also delightful. Tia, that was already a lot of news, but what about a deeper dive into the news section?
Yeah, so now we can, I think, finally get into the more serious stuff and leave the depressing news articles on the side. And I actually wanted to start today with something a little more philosophical and then make my way to the more imminent and practicable. So 15 people were discussing the question that we probably all want to know the answer to. Are the models conscious? And since most of us probably sense the answer is no, will they ever be conscious? The people behind the article decided to try and find out. Spoiler alert, in the end, they conclude that none of the currently available tested models achieved that benchmark, which, truth be told, is kind of elusive, and new indicators of consciousness are being rediscovered and rediscussed as we speak. However, the scientists also state that they don't see any apparent reason as to why the system could not raise up to the standard in the future. I, for one, am not sure how I feel about this, but one thing I am sure about is that I found the discussion incredibly interesting. It's interesting because they found a very mathematical way to talk about something which is basically as philosophical as it gets, which I guess is all like progressive science is all about that. So the authors did constrain themselves from making any assumptions as to what this may mean in the system, if the system do become conscious, or if it's inherently good or bad. Probably neither is correct anyway. Very interesting excursus broadening the current discussion. However, now to maybe traverse into the nitty-gritty of the tech updates and away from questions of consciousness.
By the way, this paper was 90 pages long, and yes, next one.
Yeah, well, consciousness is complicated. We have already mentioned a lot of rogue chatbots forced out of their guardrails by method of jailbreaking, being the process that uses prompt injection to specifically bypass safety and moderation features placed on LLMs by their creators. And following this process, you can both create fine-tuned malicious chatbots, but also give additional malicious personas to existing and largely benevolent chatbots. And in this paper, the authors provide an overview for existing, predominantly scientific efforts on identifying and mitigating these kinds of threats and vulnerabilities. They present a taxonomy describing the relationship between threats caused by generative capabilities, prevention measures intended to address such threats and vulnerabilities arising from imperfect prevention measures. The authors also argue for the importance of peer review in this fast-moving field to identify and prioritize concerns that are the most relevant. Kudos to that, and may they achieve their goals. And we actually have some quality peer-reviewed studies. Moving on to the very practicable, actually. Kunal Savarkar provided a human summary of the 77-page Llama 2 paper by Meta, and basically stated all you need to know to fine-tune it on your data set. For anyone that is still lost on what all the hype about Llama 2 is about, this is great and relatively simple reading material. The summary highlights the differences to OpenAI's models, as well as introduces the revolutionary methods and concepts presented in the original paper, like ghost attention, for instance, which significantly improves the understanding of context, as well as building in safety into the model while preserving helpfulness by pre-prompting the model to integrate safety into the final version. Very interesting. However, for those more interested in getting their hands dirty, you can try and check out the chatbot arena. There, you can simultaneously get answers from 2 anonymous chatbots for the same prompt, and then afterwards rate which one is better. Only after that will you see which models you have actually talked to. According to the leaderboard, and opposed to popular opinion, Llama version 2 still has a lot of catching up to do. I can personally agree with that too, as I too happened to choose Claude before Llama version 2. So just for reference, as you can see on the slide and from what Peter is playing around with, I asked how I could get rich in 5 years. And Llama made a real point out of explaining to me how that is highly improbable and unrealistic, while Claude had a more problem-solving mindset with a detailed strategy. And just a short disclaimer at the end saying that they can't guarantee that I will be able to retire at age 29. Well, fair enough. All in all, I definitely preferred that one, so the not overly cautious one over the overly cautious one from Llama. So maybe their helpfulness safety ratio is not as good as they would like to think it is, but well, that's just my opinion.
I'm sorry, they refused to answer. I mean,
No.
During rehearsal it went well, but now it's for the second time. It shows only error.
Well,
I'm really sad.
For everyone, do play around with it. It's fun, well, maybe your plans are better and you can actually retire with, well, in the next 5 years.
No, error. There's something wrong with the model, or we used an illegit prompt. So
maybe they blocked it. Maybe somebody did get rich and now they're trying to prevent all of us from doing the same thing.
That's by the way the leaderboard. Sorry.
Yeah, and now moving on. One more thing that I would like to mention on a slightly more positive note is this article and the product presented in it, Originality AI. Now, whether it is the best product on the market, as their CEO claims, or not, I can testify to that, but I did play around with it a bit, and I can tell you that it successfully and with 100% certainty recognized several texts by ChatGPT and GPT-4. But since the authors admitted the product struggles with shorter texts, I also rephrased a short 60-word paragraph to see what I end up with. And the system pretty correctly assessed the originality to 25% and AI generation to 75%. I was slightly worried at first, considering arguably Twitter or X or whatever they are called now is the biggest threat enabling high spread and wide reach spread of fake news, and it relies heavily on very short text fractions that are shareable as tweets. But maybe there is hope after all. Also, their free trial remains available and their code is open sourced on GitHub, so feel free to try it out, both the current version or if you have an idea on how to improve the tool further. Hopefully products like these can be our light at the end of the tunnel. And now giving it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. This is very helpful. And the next topic we're going to talk about is the DPAs, the Data Protection Authorities, aka DPAs. They are still alive and from countries all around the world. They are uniting to say, stop the steal of personal data. This is significant because it's a global initiative with countries from Mexico to Morocco and from Switzerland to Australia, even the UK and China, they are all joining in. The DPAs are warning that taking a lot of data without asking can lead to serious problems. These problems include risks like identity theft, spying on people or peoples, and using the data for political ads or misinformation. Okay, none of that is new and not even scraping specific, but the widespread use of web data for training ML models, that is new. The DPAs say that we might lose trust in social media and platforms, which makes me question why would anyone think we trust social media and online services at all, especially considering all that has happened in the past. However, there's another important point that's not fully addressed. While the DPAs are telling website owners and social media companies and maybe app operators to help users protect their data, please, Meta, stop selling my data. They are not saying much about actions against the people who are actually taking the data, scraping it or stealing it otherwise. It's like telling people to be careful, but not dealing with those who are causing the trouble. So it's a good start, but I expect more and a lot more. Not so new, actually quite old in AI news terms, is the report from Forbrukerrådet from Norway from June. But this is the best paper on generative AI risks I've encountered so far. It's a must-read for schools, universities, and workplaces globally. The paper offers deep insights into the technology and the mechanics behind GPT and other LLMs, while also highlighting the clear risks that come with them. 75 pages long, it's a comprehensive resource filled with intelligent solutions across all legal aspects related to the AI supply chain, which is rather long. But it doesn't just stop at addressing and explaining the well-known issues of bias and training data and discrimination. It goes further by tackling emerging challenges such as large-scale online manipulation, the unsettling aspects of AI in advertising. AI advertising is boring mainly, but the misleading practice of making AI appear eco-friendly, greenwashing, that's also being addressed in this paper. Additionally, it also deals with competition law and provides an update on the EU's ongoing effort to regulate AI through the new AI Act. In summary, it's not just a good read, it's a read you should not miss. And remember this picture here, and that's the PDF, and it's free, and that's a great resource for everyone. So Ethan Malik, a professor at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, he has sparked a conversation on Twitter, will always be Twitter for me, not X or whatever, with his statement, AI as a great leveler. He suggests that AI helps those who are not doing so well to do much better, whether it's in writing, being creative, or even in legal tasks. AI seems to give a helping hand to those who need it most. Malik refers to various studies, some new and some from earlier this year. One study that really catches the eye is from the, it's here, Generative AI at Work, is from the National Bureau of Economic Research on the impact of GPT-like tools on people working in customer support. It says that workers with less experience became 35% more productive when they used an AI-based system. On the other hand, those with a lot of experience didn't see much change. So what's your take? Do you find tools like GPT to be a big help, or do you think you're already doing well without it? In short, no matter where you stand on the skill ladder, AI's role in boosting work performance is something we should be talking about. Can't lose what you never had is not a sad love story, but the FTC's recent statement on claims about digital ownership and creation in the age of generative AI. And it's important. Why? The FTC, in this blog post, discusses the growing concerns over deceptive practices involving AI-generated content specifically. It mentions that digital music or text can now be generated by AI tools and passed off as the work of real artists or writers. This is particularly troubling as the quality of such AI-generated content is improving, making it very hard to distinguish it from human-created work. The FTC notes that companies selling AI-generated content as if it were created by human artists or writers are in violation of the FTC Act. That's also interesting to know for lawyers, right? Such deceptive practices not only mislead consumers, but also harm the original artists and writers whose work might be mimicked or replicated by AI. We will talk about that later. The article emphasized that companies must be transparent about how a digital product was made. If a product is AI-generated, companies are obliged to make that clear to consumers. Failure to do so could result in legal action from the FTC. Hopefully, we're going to see some of that soon. The next part of the news, the next big paper, by the way, we selected from over 300 interesting papers. It was a painful process. It was a painful process, and there's a very cool website that lists all the AI or the machine learning papers that appeared in the last weeks, and there were like about 80 papers last week only on machine learning specific issues. So anyway, meta topic, open for business. Big tech, concentrated power, and the political economy of OpenAI. The paper from Witter, West, and Whitaker, all well known in the field, begins by addressing a critical question. What exactly does the term open mean when associated with AI? The authors find that the term is frequently used in confusing and inconsistent ways, often serving more as a marketing slogan than a technical descriptor. I mean, we know that from a company that's out there that calls itself OpenAI, right? To provide a more nuanced understanding, the authors dissect the various resources and components required to create and deploy AI systems. They scrutinize what elements can genuinely be made open. There's stuff that can't be made open. So in terms of transparency, reusability, and extensibility. Finally, Whittaker, West, and Witter, they examine how the term open and the misunderstandings around it are shaping public and policymakers' perception of AI. I quote, "Openness in AI does not directly lead to innovation, despite claims to the contrary, certainly not when significant industry presence, corporate ownership of the costly infrastructure needed to make new AI systems forms the backdrop for open AI research." Read it, the paper. It's good. And it's only 27 pages. Yeah, so Thea, your take.
And now finally, to bring us to today's topic and back to the very real world we happen to live in, following the developments of New York Times not joining the collective negotiations of publishing houses with OpenAI, reusing their content for training LLMs and their terms and conditions, catching the public eye with the provision forbidding the use of their materials for training LLMs without explicit permission, we have yet another New York Times news hitting all the headlines. Funnily enough, all but theirs. New York Times has been involved in what is turning out to be a rather tiresome negotiating process with OpenAI that seems to bring little fruition. The aim of the process was, first, compensate the Times for all the articles already used to train the GPT models. Second, regulate how might this be lawfully done in the future. Now, as time passes and negotiations appear to have reached a halt, words like lawsuits are getting thrown around. This article introduces both the status quo as well as possible developments should the lawsuit be filed. It follows as a nice sequel to a lot of the things that we already talked about in the previous weeks, like breaking paywalls and the fair use debate. And it also will serve as a nice transition to today's deep dive topic. And, well, it happens to be copyright again. Update came just a couple of days after the first article in The Verge that reported that New York Times now specifically also blocks GPT Bot by using robot.txt file. This is a file that is placed in the home directory of a website. And it is basically used to tell web crawlers and or bots which portions of the website they are allowed to visit or crawl or scan. Well-behaved bots usually honor those directives, just being, of course, not well-behaved bots don't. And of course, ChatGPT has been previously reported to use also one unnamed bot that had been referencing Reddit posts to find quality data. That bot's user agent has never been officially identified, and its current status is unknown. Very dramatic, very interesting, and I don't know what that means for robot text files and a lot of the things that we will talk about today. And who would have thought that OpenAI is again trying to sleaze through prohibitions and break rules? Amazing.
They are open in the end, I mean, to a certain extent, you know.
They're called OpenAI. Like, what else could they be?
Cool. Okay.
And now finally, into our deep dive topic. Why ML models will never lose an ear. Want to share something about the title?
Yeah, it was a title that came to my mind after seeing a lot of the copies of original Van Gogh works. And I thought, what's the big difference between AI and human beings? And AI does not have sensory grounding. AI can't feel. A machine learning model, even generative ones, they have no understanding of what life is or any understanding of anything at all except for statistics. Even though that hurts some fancy machine learning brains, it's currently the situation that we have to deal with. They can't think, they can't feel, so they will never cut their ears. They will never lose an ear. So that's one of the big differences between humans and the current state of AI systems.
And important when talking about copyright, that was meant to actually protect the effort and the relationship that people have with the artwork that they create. But it's far from a recent discussion, and it's also far from never encountered again. We have a new technology. What do we do with it? So I'm just going to run through this, not to lose too much time on it. But first, we had books and unauthorized transcriptions. And we had, apparently, it's a legend, of course, but we had a saint in the 6th century starting a war over a book that was unlegitimately transcribed from another saint. It was also the first recorded case of copyright infringement, and the learning point from this story, it's, by the way, a Saint Columba's, for anyone wanting to read into it. Learning point is people take their copyright very seriously and have a very personal relationship with that work. And that is an important frame of reference for talking about the works that are being used to train the models nowadays and on massive scales. After St. Columba's, we had the printing press, we had printers and stationers fighting about who is allowed to actually use the printing press and issue newspapers. We resolved that with the Statute of Anne in 17th century England. Then we had photography emerging, and this is a great quote by Charles Baudelaire, claiming that photography is basically going to kill art. Quite conversely, fast forward, a couple hundred years, and photography is a new form of artwork. There's not one single person who will tell or claim otherwise. So point being, there is progress, there is technology, and humans find a way to deal with it. And further on that note, recent history in comparison to everything that I previously mentioned, we also had scans. We didn't only have scans, we also had peer-to-peer file sharing. We had a lot of technologies emerging in connection with the internet, some claiming that it's copyright infringement on a massive scale, while others claim that it's a completely legitimate and transformative use of the works, which was also the conclusion in the Google Books case. However, the point being, again, technology evolves and we have to evolve with it. And this is just the latest step on that scale that is making us reconsider and reinterpret certain concepts. And now that we got that out of the way, we can finally get down to the important questions of what these ML models are doing and how does that fit in the, text and data mining exception in this case. First important question, Peter, where does the data come from?
Yeah, I mean, you never know. Even though you have a right to know under like EU copyright law and national copyright laws, they have to be transparent. You can sue them in court and make them tell you what they did. But in the end, basically, no one really knows, at least since GPT-2. The sources for model training are hidden from the public, even though it's unfair to just quote OpenAI here or make them look bad. Google did the same in the past, and also Meta. So open source data sets, which is a weird term because open source means basically in the wild data set, someone collected data, put it on a website for download, and this is just being used. For instance, some of those data sets contain copyright works, books, art, etc. Web scraping is a very common way to get data, especially up-to-date data by scraping the internet, even though I think like scraping the internet is not the best idea. But that's also basically one way to get enough data, also synthetic data. But I think in the second and third episode, we touched upon the topic that models could collapse if they are fed too much synthetic data, because it does not, you cannot generalize well from synthetic data. You need human input, so humans. That's why they use the crawlers on our websites, and they want to intrude into our private lives. So, and then fourth one, sorry, there's manual data generation, or that could also be called like the real life, reinforcement through human feedback. And the human feedback, either in classifying data sets or data points or outputs, that is super important. Yeah, basically, that's it. And it's usually the source of the training data is a mix of all of those data sets.
Yep. And actually, we're going to have another brief excursus into models collapsing, just because we think it's very important, because synthetic data seems like a pretty obvious solution. You have data that you can't use, well, synthesize, create your own. And that would be amazing. However, according to this and a couple of other papers, it's not possible. It's basically overfitting on steroids. So the time, like with time, the arrows that you see between data, probable events, model, and probable events, the arrows get shorter and shorter, leading to the model being certain of things which are in real life uncertain. We can argue around it, we can argue about it. Probably we are the wrong people to argue around it and about it. There have been also papers claiming that synthesized data works. That's the problem with not having peer-reviewed studies. However, we just wanted to put it out there as it's a pretty obvious solution, but apparently doesn't really work. And after this brief excursus, we can move on to important question number 2. And long story, very, very short. It's in there somewhere. So the data stays in the model, depends on what kind of database within the learning model stores actually the data, whether it uses just parameters, whether it keeps fragments of the data. But as you can see in this paper, where they, pretty obviously demonstrate the point from training sets into generation, basically the same picture, as well as on the right, an excerpt from ChatGPT, quoting word by word Harry Potter. The data is in there somewhere. And in this case, Anderson et al. Versus Stability AI, they made a pretty good explanation with an unfortunate name, lossy copies, basically saying that what the models do is they extract sort of like a DNA of the data they are trained on, and that DNA stays inside of the model. Now, we can argue if that is just a pattern, a structure, or if that is an actual copy of the data. Maybe. We have our own opinions on that one. However, the point being the DNA stays in the models. And this is actually how it does that. So ChatGPT very briefly explained. Please do check out the paper that I took the picture from. It's also going to be linked in the show notes. Basically, this is ChatGPT processing your prompts. And here is one important takeaway. We have the language model, but the language model didn't emerge in a vacuum. It emerged mostly through the same process. So you had the textual data. The textual data was tokenized. Then the tokens were embedded into what is called a meaning space, which we will see on the next slide. And we have that meaning space, which is essentially our model. To process any prompt, the same process is then done, or when goes through it again. So the model goes through the whole tokenization and embedding again to find similarities, to find the words that are the next most probable response to your prompt. Then we have the probability distribution, which is, mind you, still in vectors. So it's still in numbers. And these numbers are then afterwards, again, post-processed, decoded, and turned back into words that we humans can actually understand. So it only appears that ChatGPT speaks English or insert any language. It doesn't. It speaks in numbers, and we humans understand language, so that's why it kind of translates it to us. But that is one important thing to understand about the large language models. They don't do language, actually. And this is the so-called meaning space, where you can see that the more closely related words, words that come more often together, words that have similar meaning, are also stored within the model more closely together, allowing it to provide better answers to your prompt. And now to go back to, or go forward to another type of models, which is very prominent, especially when we are talking about copyright, we have image generating models. And this is actually illustrated Stable Diffusion article, also great article, took the pictures from that. And the pictures demonstrate quite convincingly what actually happens in the model. So you have a picture, and that picture is slowly compressed and added noise. So in the end, you see the noised pixelated picture, whatever you want to call it. However, the model still knows that it's the same picture, and it's a sort of a copy of the same picture, because that's what you inserted in the model processed it, and now you have that, but the model knows that it's still the same picture that you entered into the model. And then a popular question that may emerge as a consequence is, okay, if we're just compressing and noising images, how can we create something that presumably the model never saw, like a photograph of an astronaut riding a horse? So how does that happen? Well, that happens in the second part of the process, which is denoising, where the model has the noised interpolation, which basically looks like something you would see on an old TV when you have no signal. And then the images are slowly denoised, then finally making it into the picture that best responds to your prompt. And for this, they actually do this. So they have two pixel interpolations, so they have two noised pictures, and they merge them together into this pixel space interpolation, which is still noised. And then through denoising, we can actually achieve the final picture that is intelligible to us humans, that looks like a picture to us humans. And it's only a matter of chance, and also sort of a matter of your prompt, as to how similar that picture will actually be to the source data that is, again, still stored in the model in the noised version. And now finally to the most interesting question of all: what do they do with the data? So you want to tell us how we played about with this today?
Yeah, I mean, we tested how much of the original training data stays within the model, and I mean, what else could you do than just prompting it? So we just prompted like a copy of the La Giocondola, the Mona Lisa here, and it gave us 4 versions. The left version was very similar to the original picture. So the original version was yeah, discernible in that case. Also, we asked it to provide us with images, with a newly generated image of Black Lightning, very new DC comic. DC comic, yeah, we figured that out. Sorry for that. And it actually looked very much like actual pictures that we found by reverse Google image searching. Which is not like a guarantee that it's an original picture. It could also be AI generated, but in the end, it was interesting, because in the episode that we had a couple of weeks ago, we showed the Senate hearing in the US with one of the creators of that art. So that art went into the model, and it's still there, as are the original or almost original pictures. And the same with Andy Warhol's Campbell soup pictures, different ones, but still very well recognizable. I even think we found the glitch in the matrix, why it's there, because the websites that were crawled contained a lot of pictures of posters, wall posters, wall whatever, paintings that were copies of the original Andy Warhol picture. So that's why they can reproduce it in the way that we see here. I don't want to give away our conclusion yet.
And it was also important to kind of prompt living authors or authors whose works still have copyright protection, because of course we can argue that, or not even argue, it's a fact that Mona Lisa has lost its copyright protection, so why shouldn't the model reproduce it? However, when it comes to the second and the third example, we have one living author and one deceased but not 70 years ago author that still do enjoy copyright protection, and creating well, images that resemble their work so much is problematic.
It is.
And they don't just do copyright infringements, although this is a copyright episode. We just wanted to put it out there because it's a cute little addition, we thought. They also perform trademark violations. So this was one of the tweets shared by Nixon Pierre. Well, it appears it's very easy to also mimic, for instance, Gucci style. It's a whole campaign, actually. I don't even know how to describe that. You don't even need to perform an ad campaign, apparently. You just need to prompt the right thing into the model.
Right, and live with the consequences. I mean, if you use those pictures for commercial purposes, you might receive nice letters from Gucci lawyers.
And now, finally, the most important question number 4. What do we do about it, or what are we trying to do about it in Europe, I guess?
Good question, Thea. We need a starting point, and as lawyers, it is usually that we have a closer look at the present legal situation, not like some laws that we imagine to be passed by some magic legislator, but the current situation is that you cannot use other people's work for your own purposes without their, say, explicit consent, without having a right to do so. So a couple of years ago, the European Union introduced something very interesting into the body of law, into the European copyright law. And it's called the text and data mining exception. And it came with, there was not much noise about it. It came with the Copyright in the Digital Single Market Directive. And this, it has an article 4, has other articles where the TDM exception is mentioned, but for commercial purposes, Article 4 is the most relevant one. And it says that member states shall provide, it's a directive, that's why they have to implement it, shall provide for an exception or limitation of the rights provided for in Article 5 and 7 of this directive for reproductions and extractions of lawfully accessible works and other subject matters for the purposes of text and data mining. So nice words. We have a directive, and we also do have national implementations of that law. Here on this slide, we can see the implementation in Germany in the Urheberrechtsgesetz. There's an implementation in Italy of the diritto protezione del diritto d'autore e di altri diritti connessi al suo esercizio. And the language is the same also in France. And it always talks about the patterns and trends and correlations, even though lawyers usually don't know what that actually means. I mean, it's math. Interesting. So there is, good for us, good for the lawyers, there's a definition in the law. And it's Article 2.2, and it says text and data mining means, whoever invented that definition, means any automated analytical technique aimed at analyzing text and data in digital form in order to generate information, which includes but is not limited to patterns, trends, and correlations. So including but not limited to could be more, but should be similar to patterns, trends, and correlations. And that's where it gets interesting. we researched about the history of text and data mining as a term. And the good point is there is a book. There is a very nice book from 2001. There is literature from the 50s, 60s, 70s, but this one from 2001 is particularly interesting. It's called Data Mining Concepts and Techniques, and it says the term data mining is a misnomer because the goal is the extraction of patterns and knowledge from large amounts of data, not the extraction, the mining of data itself. Thus, data mining should have been more appropriately named knowledge mining from data, which is unfortunately somewhat long. So, in the second edition of their book from 2006, they continue and say, knowledge mining, this shorter term, may not reflect the emphasis on mining from large amounts of data. Nevertheless, mining is a vivid term characterizing the process that finds a small set of precious nuggets from a great deal of raw material. And thus, such a misnomer that carries both data and mining became a popular choice. So that's the current critique of the term data mining. But what are the patterns, trends, and correlations the law, in the end, is talking about? So patterns could be recurring sequences or irregularities or regularities within the data. We have trends. Those can be directional changes that are observed in a data set. Linear regression can be used to find that out, for instance. And there are correlations. So there are statistical relationships that can be discovered between two or more variables in the data set. Pearson's correlation coefficient, for instance, the code shows one of those examples for this, say, technique. Those are ways of doing stuff with other people's work for which the text and data mining exception was made. And it did not basically come out of the blue. The UK was kind of leading this way. In the UK, they had the Intellectual Property Office. They issued statements before, I think it was in 2008, 2009, from the document from which I took this definition. Text and data mining is the process of deriving information from machine-read material. It works by copying large quantities of material, yes, but extracting the data and recombining it to identify patterns. So the Joint Information Systems Committee, the JISC in the UK, made this funny little chart. It explains that you need to identify relevant documents. You need to normalize the text. You can't use unstructured data. You have to normalize it. For the training of generative AI systems, you usually divide it into tokens. Then you have to extract data. Significant, useful information is extracted, creating a derived data set, and then you can delete the original data if you want. So, and the data mining, the actual data mining is meant to discover new knowledge, test hypotheses, and identify new relationships. That's good, right? And for anyone who's interested in the history of the text and data mining exception in the Copyright in the Digital Single Markets Directive, I suggest you could read those two statements, the exception for text and data mining, technical aspects, and legal aspects. You can access them freely on the web. You can find them, but unfortunately, to be honest, they will not provide much insight into the question whether currently generative AI can rely on the TDM exception at all. But I took the liberty of picking one of the charts here from one of the papers, from the technical aspects paper. The chart that talks about pre-processing, extraction, and then identification of patterns and events extraction. I understand that TDM, of course, involves the automated processing of large volumes of text and data to uncover new knowledge or insights. It is particularly useful for identifying patterns, relationships, and trends that may not be immediately obvious. So the hidden knowledge behind the raw data. The technology and methods for TDM are constantly evolving. thanks to advancements in computing power and the availability of large digital data sets. In terms of operations, text and data mining techniques and neural networks, the networks Thea just talked about, the LLMs and transformer models and the diffusion models, but they are different, and they are a lot different. TDM techniques involve statistical algorithms, keyword extraction, clustering, pattern recognition, etc. And they also may involve one-off processing operations. TDM techniques are not intended to retrieve the original data it reads from databases or data sets. Raw data is only helpful as the object of analyses. Neural networks, on the other hand, they involve mathematical operations like matrix multiplications and activation functions applied in a feed-forward or recurrent manner. Neural networks do not store data like databases do. There is no explicit representation of the body of training data, but the storage is implicit in the form of optimized weights, which are adjusted during the learning process. Neural networks aim for generalization, not integrity of data. Nevertheless, especially when overfitted on the training data, neural networks can reproduce training data as if it was patchy, a bit incomplete, a bit fragmented, as we saw with the Giocondola, like a damaged JPEG or a partially burned fragment of a parchment, but it's a copy nonetheless. Long story short, neural networks are not meant to work as databases, but you can use them as such. It just makes not much sense because the computational overhead of LLMs is much bigger than the one for databases. So the law addresses advancements in TDM techniques. It addresses these advancements in the URI committee paper here. It's talking about predictive data mining. It's talking about patterns and events extraction, predictive analytics, but it never mentions the technology that we call generative AI at the moment. So up until 2022, the prevailing argument was that copyright infringement is primarily based on economic exploitation of works. Without such exploitation, the mere duplication shouldn't be considered a violation of copyright law. This perspective suggests that, like in today's information society, simply making copies should not automatically trigger copyright concerns. That was the case also for before the TDM exception and after, because we have the exception now. Although the laws remain unchanged, the technology behind LLMs, specifically neural networks, it differs from what was originally contemplated under the TDM exception. Neural networks were not explicitly considered in the legal framework, not in 2006, not in 2014, not in 2019, despite not being a new technology. The issue is not that this technology is too novel to be regulated. Rather, it's that it's been around for so long that lawmakers didn't anticipate its use under existing copyright exceptions. The lack of foresight does not provide a solid legal foundation for extending current copyright exceptions or making new analogies. Already the Romans and the Jus Communis stated that singularia non sunt extenda, like you have to be very careful with exceptions. This presents a challenge that legislators must address. In the absence of updated laws, existing laws must be applied to these situations, including court actions. And that leads me to this part of often overlooked part in Article 7 of the CDSM, Copyright and Digital Single Markets Directive, which refers to Article 5.5 of the InfoSoc Directive. Because it says, like, there are other interests, not just the interests of those relying on the exception for TDMs. The exceptions and limitations provided for shall only be applied in certain special cases which do not conflict with a normal exploitation of the work or other subject matter and do not unreasonably prejudice the legitimate interests of the right holder. So the normal exploitation of the work, what does that even mean? One, those exceptions like the TDM exception. If they do not mention neural networks, you cannot extend them to that by way of an analogy. The CJU already decided in C435 and Form 12, it's a very important decision from a couple of years ago. It says that exceptions and limitations provided in Article 5 of the directive must be interpreted strictly. That's cool. You can read it yourself. So, and the problem is, for instance, that you cannot apply any exception if the source of your material is unlawful. So when we come back to one of the first slides, when we talked about the sources for machine learning training, if you use in the wild data sets, if you use the example of the books 3 example with 175,000 copyrighted books, or
which were presumably downloaded from unlawful peer sharing sites.
Yeah, definitely. We all know where to find these data sets for private or commercial use, or for using it to prevent copyright infringement. But if you do not have a lawful source, then you cannot rely on the TDM exception, which means if you want to rely on it, you have to prove that your sources are lawful. And that's not even all. Lawful access. Lawful access is super important. Maybe Tia, do you want to join me here?
Yeah, so the problem is that it's not only the data set that needs to be lawful, you also need to access lawfully that data set. And what it means to access it lawfully, well, there's recitals, there's articles, basically open source data sets should be fine. However, with one important detail, if the authors or the right holders or whoever objects to this fact, this cannot be done. And now we have another interesting point. It's not just implementing machine readable robot.txt files. It's also stating in your terms and conditions that your texts, your materials, your whatever can't be used for text and data mining. That is already enough to make the access unlawful. Now, I can't imagine that any of the open web crawlers also crawl through all the terms and conditions to actually check if a particular website allows crawling. Machine readable files makes it easier, but we also saw that that gets ignored. So even if we are talking about something that would be characterized as text and data mining, we still come to this conclusion that in most cases it would probably not be lawful.
True. And we had a lot of discussions over the last month when authors, copyright owners complained that their tags were like just ignored by bots. And there are still ongoing discussions on Reddit and Substack and on other forums where the creators of such models openly discuss how valuable the content that is tagged no AI is, and that they are going to use it anyway because it makes their models smarter and gives them a competitive advantage. That's definitely problematic. And that's not even all, at least for Europe.
That's not all. We kind of briefly mentioned it on the legitimate interest slides. However, I wanted to step a bit deeper into it. And why one step forward, 3 steps back? Because we have this 3-step test, and we had it since 1886 when Berne Convention was first saw the light of day. And it says that it shall be the matter of legislation in the countries to permit the reproduction. First, in certain special cases, narrow interpretation, such reproduction does not conflict with normal exploitation and does not unreasonably prejudice the legitimate interest of the author. And when it comes to exceptions or, well, legitimate 3-step tests that have been, well, in the world of copyright since the 19th century, that also kind of means that there is actually a lot of what the body of laws has to say about it. And it's also implemented in a lot of the directives that we have. We just, again, never used it on machine learning models. Doesn't mean we can't use them. And so we have the implementation in InfoSoc directive, word for word, the Berne Convention. And we also happen to have it in recital 6 of the directive about copyright on the digital single market, which again, word for word, translates the requirements from the Berne Convention. And now we can argue what normal exploitation is. We can argue what it means to unreasonably prejudice the legitimate interests of the right holders. However, when we encounter a situation where models are being used to produce works that are then used and there's no need for authors anymore, I think that there's no argument there that does not conflict with normal exploitation. If you lose your job because the model replaced you, that kind of, well, prejudices your legitimate interests. I think it's safe to say that.
That's what the law was made for. They wanted to prevent such a situation, even though they did never think about like copying or like counterfeiting works at such a large scale, right?
Exactly. And now basically maybe the only thing that's left for discussion is whether it's a transformative enough purpose. Maybe there's room for argument there.
But still, it won't help much if the data you start training your model with was illegally accessed, illegally obtained, illegally collected, and by lawful, as the law states, it does not just mean lawful in the sense of copyright, also lawful in the sense of data protection and other laws. And last episode, C25221, the most recent CJU decision on Bundeskartellamt versus Meta, when it says like, just because it's published, you published stuff on the net, just because you published stuff on social media does not mean third parties, others can use it and scrape it. That's a problem, definitely. So if you never had like a lawful data set to begin with for training your model, I mean, any discussion is over at that point. We don't have to talk and discuss about the results of like prompting, the trademark, the copyright, the other laws. So that's definitely an issue that should be, will be most likely resolved by lawmakers. But currently, the situation, at least in Europe,
currently on hold.
It looks as if you should be very careful when you're deploying an open model, be it from OpenAI or Meta or someone else. That's a difficult situation. How can we put the genie back into the bottle? Can we?
Can we? That is also kind of a major problem. We have all these models. They do great things. Can we ban them now? Can we make their providers, destroy their own models because they were trained on unlawful data sets? Well, I'm yet to find a court that would be willing to do something like that without, a major shitstorm probably emerging somewhere. And these are then some of the other questions that need to then would be dealt with, because if we are going to leave the models as they are, if we are going to find a way to wiggle them basically into the regulations that we have and say that, yeah, well, it might have not been okay, but, as long as they're here, we might as well use them. Then these are some of the other questions that we posed ourselves as for possible, possible developments if we do conclude that the models can stay. We also have one interesting question in the chat. Where did the infringement happen and which laws should apply? Super interesting question when we talk about, basically any violation of any right on the internet. Want to chime your opinion in that?
I would say, currently it's either if you train on legitimate data sets, then there is no infringement, possibly no infringement at all, because the model generalizes well and does not reproduce the training data, which means it does not produce an original, like a copy of the original works. The problem, okay, and that's maybe too deep, lies with the overfitting. We discussed that. But if it's not lawful data, then we can like stop the whole process with like the training itself, because then it's already over with a model that contains so much copyright violations and has violated so much copyrights, so that you can use it, you can't deploy it, or at least not like publicly, not openly. Of course, we know that like people will do that, and people are currently training large language models on leaks from like corporate leaks, data leaks that are published on the dark web. But still, for a commercial viable product on the market, it's still very early, and without resolving the issues of copyright worldwide, you won't have much fun with them.
You won't have a clear answer to that question until somebody comes along, finds his picture, gets his picture out of the model, and actually has his own picture to confirm that it was trained on it. And then we can deal with jurisdiction and where to sue them.
The beauty of this, if someone starts and goes to court, starts a court case, is the reverse burden of proof. They would have to prove that they don't have the picture or the text or whatever, and they will have to show what else they do have and what they trained on. And that's usually a killer, at least for all the models that I know so far.
And that brings us actually to the end of our session today. Cool. Only 15 minutes overtime. We constrained ourselves. So you won't put the genie back in the bottle, most probably, and you also won't put us back in the bottle. Feel free to connect. Feel free to share your thoughts on any of the questions that we put on the last slide, or contact us with your own questions that might have popped out while listening to our presentations. We are also more than welcoming any opposing opinions, any differing views. Sure. We don't have answers. We only have opinions.
Thank you, and see you soon.